Hi there. If you've been here before, I'm glad you're back. And if this is your first time, welcome. My name is Jessica Shreve, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas. And as I promised in the last video, today I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you about my professional background and kind of where I've gone along my journey to get where I'm at today. So this is very different than what you're typically going to get in counseling, because obviously in the counseling office, everything is about the client. It's not really about the therapist. However, on this platform, I feel like it's slightly different, because if you're going to be listening to me and considering ideas and things that I use, I think it's really helpful for you to know a little bit of my background. So today I'm going to be kind of sharing and highlighting some things throughout my professional journey that have gotten me to where I'm at, and kind of giving you tidbits that I've learned and that I think are important that I've gotten along the way. So here we go. We're going to start all the way back, way back, with my undergraduate work. And I know that sounds kind of odd that I would bring that up, but I learned something really important back at that time that I think is good to share. When I was in doing my undergraduate, so when I was in college, and I was almost at the very end of my college career. I was about to, I had one semester left before I was going to be graduating, and I had an advisor that pulled me in and said, I just want to share with you that I really think you should consider majoring in psychology. So I had a major in biology at that time, and I was minoring in psychology, and he let me know that he thought it would be important for me to actually major in psychology as well. And what he was seeing was how much I really enjoyed the psychology classes, how much more interested I seemed in those. And even though it had been my plan all along for years, I was going to be a physical therapist. But he was willing to say, I think you should reconsider, because I think you may miss your calling if you do that. And I really thought that was something important. I was really happy later on that I had somebody that was willing to say, you have this path that you're going, you've kind of set these expectations for yourself. And I was just really happy that he was willing to step up and be that person to say, hey, let's reconsider things. And that's a lesson that for me has been important kind of throughout my journey and work with clients as well, is sometimes we have this path, but I think it's okay to also reconsider and look at something else. So after that, I took a break for a little bit and then decided counseling was what I wanted to do, and I was ready to go back to school and get my degree and work towards licensure to do that. So I applied at Sam Houston and got into the program, and at that time I decided that it was really on my heart to work with kids. And if that's the direction I was going to go in, I wanted to start getting some experience in working with kids. So I found a place where you worked in individual sessions with kids. It wasn't therapy, but you would do activities with kids one-on-one. And at that time was where I really started to kind of hone in on what it's like working with kids. And I really got to see that things are different for each kid. You can have, a basic program, or you can have a basic idea of what you're doing with them, but every day is going to be different. Every client's going to be different. Every session with each client is going to be different. And that's where I really started kind of honing in on how important it is to be aware of what's going on for a kid each day and kind of figuring out what works best for them. And that's been a huge thing for me, and just seeing that, I can't base the first time that I meet somebody that everything's going to be just the same, and especially in working with kids, that things are going to be different each day, each session. Sometimes from the beginning of a session to the end of it, it's going to be different with kids. And so that was something I really took away from that space, is that with kids it's really different each day, and you kind of have to be on your toes and ready to go. So from there I moved into another role with kids. So at that time, when I was leaving that position, I really wanted to get some experience that I hadn't had before. And I wasn't really sure what that was looking like, or what places to look in searching for a new position. I found a youth emergency shelter. So this shelter was for kids ages 10 to 17. And it was a short-term shelter because it was for emergencies, so kids could stay there up to 30 days. And I went in as a residential advisor there. And this was completely different experience than I'd ever had before. I'd not really been, in a situation where I was working directly with kids who were kind of in crisis, who are just coming out of crisis, and who are not secure in where they're at. They don't know what housing's going to look like, or sometimes they may not have known where their next meal was going to come from. And there are so many things that I learned from the kids that I worked with there. And one of them was, I think one of the most important things was the kids that I worked with there didn't want to be treated any differently than anybody else. And, they didn't want people who felt sorry for them or bad for them because of the things that had happened in their lives or things that had even been done to them in their lives. They wanted to be treated like everybody else. They wanted as much, and I always hesitate to use this word, but they wanted as quote unquote normal, as much normal as they could get. And said, I don't always like that because who knows what normal is, right? Normal is different for everybody. But they wanted things to just be as normal as possible. And so it was really important to see, okay, yes, they've had a lot of things that have happened, but that's not who they are. They are the kid that's in front of me. They are a kid that is right here and talking with me. Whatever it is we're doing that day, they just wanted to be treated normal, which I thought was something really huge to notice, and something to really take note of, because in any situation I think that we're in, that's what the majority of clients that we work with want, is they just want to be treated like anybody else. They don't want to be treated, special, or like there's something wrong, because there's not. They are who they are. So that was one of the big things I learned. So I'm going to pick up with the second thing that I learned at the shelter. And it was actually brought together later with a training that I had. So with those two things together, we're looking at how to deal with big emotions. And I recognized when I was at the shelter that not all kids are able to deal with big emotions. They don't have the skills to calm down, when they get really frustrated or when they're upset, or what they can do to change what's going on. They don't necessarily know how to talk about it and how to process through what they're feeling, or discuss, if there's an issue, going and talking to the person to fix that issue. And so in the training that I took later on, it really kind of helped me put all that together. When they talked about, as a baby, when there's something wrong, the baby cries. And the parent comes along and they pick them up, they comfort them, and they take care of whatever the issue is. Maybe they feed the baby, or they change the baby, they put them to sleep if it's nap time. But the parent comes along and takes care of the issue for the baby. Then as the kids start to, get a couple years older, they're learning from their parents how to calm down. So they're watching, the parents are modeling for them how they're supposed to handle these big emotions, and the parents are also helping the child to deal with that. So when they get really upset and you take them to their room and you talk through what's going on and help them to come down from maybe crying and throwing a fit to they're talking about it, they're able to kind of work through that, and then they're able to come back out because they're okay now. So they start to kind of learn, how do I do this process, and what does this look like to start to manage my own emotions. And then as they get a little older, and especially into their teenage years, of course, we want them to be able to, if they get into a situation where they're frustrated or upset or sad or crying, we want them to be able to kind of work through those emotions on their own. And so by going through this process, kids learn how to do that. And what I was seeing in the shelter, though, is that not everybody has had somebody to teach them how to handle those emotions. And if we're not taught something, we don't know. So like, if we don't have somebody to teach us how to brush our teeth when we're little, we don't just magically know how to take care of that. So somebody teaches us that process, they walk us through, and it's the same thing with managing emotions. And so I was learning at the shelter that not everybody knows how to do that. So sometimes we have to take a step back and say, okay, I know you're a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid that's in front of me, and I feel like you should be able to do those things, but since you haven't been taught, I'm going to step back a little bit and I'm going to work with you. Starting at step 2 or 3, we're not going to work from the expectation that you know how to do this just because you're of age to know how. And so really being aware and recognizing when it's time to take some steps back and start further back in the process and not have the expectations that you should already know what you're doing here. And I think a third really big one that I learned working at the shelter was kids really want to be listened to. They don't always want us to try to fix their problems. They don't always want us to give feedback. They don't always want us to problem solve what's going on for them. Sometimes kids really just need someone to take the time to listen to them. One of the ways that I address this sometimes with parents too is like how you want to come home and you want to vent after a hard day at work, or you want to talk about how difficult things were and you need to get it off your chest so that you can move forward with your day. Kids need that same thing. School is their work, and when they get home, sometimes they need to just get it off their chest. And so we just have to remember that they need that time as well. They're not just, being dramatic as we think they may be sometimes. They're not just being dramatic about things, but they're actually sharing what's going on with them too, which is really important. And so as much as there's times where we're like, I could give you some solutions, or I could give you some things to try that may quote unquote fix these things for you, that's not always what kids want. So sometimes we just need to be able to sit back and listen and just let them talk and share whatever it is that they're willing to share with us. So that for me, the shelter was a space that I really learned a lot about working with kids and working with teenagers, because those kids didn't always have the choice. They didn't do something that resulted in them being there. It was the choice of adults and things that the adults decided to do. And then it was other adults that chose to put them in that place to keep them safe. And so they didn't have the choice to be there, and they didn't always want me, to be talking with them or to be working with them or to be helping them or anything that I was doing. And so keeping in mind too that it's not always their choice, and so when it's not their choice, I have to help figure out ways that we can work together so that they'll be okay with doing that. So really just kind of getting those creative juices flowing. So then I made the transition from emergency shelter into a full-time counseling position. And at that time it was at a nonprofit, and it was working with lots of families in the community. And I think in my head at that time I thought, well, things like there's not really a lot that happens in the community around me and around where I'm at, so what are the kinds of issues I'm going to be dealing with? And it was then that I realized that kids deal with so much and families deal with so much on a daily basis, and yet they continue to get up and they go to school and the parents go to work, and they are doing everything that they can to lead lives and to make it through every day while they're dealing with such big things. And you just don't always think about that. What is everybody going through? And so I realized, like, you don't know what's happening for everybody. You don't know what's going on for them every day. And so really just being aware that there may be something really big, like maybe somebody's dog got hit that morning, and then you're working with them and they haven't shared that with you, but you can just see that there's pain there, that there's something going on. So just recognizing that you don't always know what's going on for somebody, because everybody's dealing with things. And sometimes something that to me may seem really small or trivial, for somebody else is a huge deal, and vice versa. Something that may seem really small or trivial to them may be a huge deal to me. And so really just kind of being kind and aware of what's going on for everybody. It was also at this time that I started doing a lot more work with parents and with families in general, because before at the shelter I was working with just the kids because there typically was not parent involvement. But here, in this role, I was working more with not only the kids who were the identified client, but also working with their parents and other family members. And here's where I got to really start kind of seeing what that dynamic like and what that dynamic looks like in families. And in, kind of seeing too that if you work with just a kid by themselves, so if we're looking in a family setting, if I'm working with just a kid by themselves, I really got to see that it's hard to make as much change as if you involve more people in the family. So a lot of times it's just going to be whoever that primary caregiver is, that's typically involved in the process. But then you also get other people coming in, like you start to see, oh, well, there's grandparents that are more involved, or maybe there's aunts or uncles that are more involved in the family, or who else is living in the household. And so I started to really kind of see more of the family dynamics and how that works. And I found that really interesting in looking at not just an individual and what's going on for them, but really how does a family work and how does that kind of blend together. I also at that time did a little bit of work with couples. I started to see, I was able to work with some of the couples because if you look at the way that a couple is handling situations and kind of the things that they're working through, you can really see the effects that it has on the kids. And so I got to start seeing, what does that dynamic look like and how does that dynamic affect kids in the household as well. I also got to work with schools a little bit more at that time and really kind of seeing that dynamic of what goes on throughout the school day and how things are handled at school and what that looks like as kids are transitioning home. And so it was interesting to see what that dynamic kind of looks like and how school affects everything that goes on afterwards. And then also doing groups in schools. That was kind of my first introduction into doing groups, having a bunch of kids in the room together. And I really love doing that because sometimes for kids it's a little bit scary to come in. Like I'm going to come in and I'm going to sit in a room with an adult and we're going to talk. And that can feel scary and intimidating. And as much as a therapist, I can, work with them and help to make them feel more comfortable and have them tell me what's going to, help them to feel more comfortable. It was really, really neat to see that dynamic play out in group because the kids would get in there and they start throwing ideas out and how they handle different situations and what they do to handle their anxiety, how they bring themselves down when they're feeling a lot of anxiety, or what it looks like when, they're having an issue with another family member and kind of how they manage those things. And so I really loved seeing what that dynamic looks like between kids because they get to choose what they share. They get to, they don't have to share everything in group. They get to kind of pick and choose what it is that they're willing to let everybody else know about. But it was really fun to see kids say, hey, yeah, I've been through that too. You're not dealing with that alone. I've been through that too. And here's some of the things that worked for me. And so kind of seeing what that group process looks like was a really helpful thing for me and something that I really enjoyed seeing. So I think the last big thing that I took away from agency, from working at the agency, at the end I was in more of a management position. I was the assistant director of a counseling program there. And so I did half management and then half seeing clients. And it was really interesting to me seeing how all of the kind of background work and things that happen in an agency, and when you have other entities that are involved in the work that you do with clients, it helped me to see what that's like and what kind of effects that these other entities can have on the work that you're doing with clients. And at that time was when I started to see that I really wanted to kind of break free of that and what that looks like. I really want the work that I do with clients to be focused on the client that's in front of me and what I'm able to do with them that's going to be the most helpful thing for them, and really kind of customizing and personalizing the process for what's going to be best for them. And so when I went from agency work and moving into private practice, there were definitely some things to think about and choices to make. And one of those was whether or not to take insurance. And while at the agency we didn't have insurance, we did have things like grants, and we had funding from, outside entities coming in that would say, yes, you can do X, Y, and Z, and no, you can't do A, B, or C. And I really looked at that and decided that I didn't want insurance involvement. And why is that? Well, to me, kind of seeing how that worked at the agency too, I didn't diagnose anybody at the agency. That wasn't something that we were required to do, and that was something that I also chose not to do. And I found that I could work really well with my clients if we looked kind of at what's going on for them, what are the changes that we want to see, and we could work from there. That to me seemed to work better than working from a diagnostic perspective of, here's the diagnosis that we figured out for you, here's what's going on for you, and then what are we going to do from there. So for me, I think it's important not to work from a diagnostic perspective. Now, that means different things to different people, and I think it's super important that every therapist works from what they're comfortable with. But I like the freedom of not having to diagnose a client in order to work with them. And in seeing all of the work that I did at the agency with clients, and not diagnosing them was extremely helpful. There are times, I think, yes, that diagnosing is relevant. It can be helpful. It can help people to, whether it's access medications that can be useful, or it can help to open other resources by having a diagnosis. And so I do work with clients, and if they need a diagnosis, or really we think it would be something important or helpful for them in their process, we definitely work towards having that happen, but it's not something that I choose to do. And so that's another piece of that, not working with the insurance, is I don't have to diagnose anybody, because with insurance coverage, of course, you're always required to have a diagnosis. And so I wanted to break away from anyone else telling me how to do my counseling, and so I feel like not having insurance is something that allows me to do that as well. And I think one of the great things that I have seen in private practice too is the freedom to work with the families. It has been so freeing for me to be able to say, okay, let's bring you in and let's talk about what's going on, and let's figure out what the best course of action is. And we can include who we need to include, or not include who we don't need to include. And what I mean by that, well, sometimes we need to include extended family members. As I talked about earlier, we may have more than just like parents and kid living in the home. And so we may need to include other people, or there's so many blended families, and blending families is not easy. It can be a really difficult thing to do. And so I think it's important to be able to work with those blended families in ways that work best for them. Working with parents has been something too that I think makes a really big difference when we're looking at kids, because the better that the parents are working together, whether that's parenting together in the household, or if that's co-parenting through a separation, or once a divorce has happened, and figuring out what it's like moving forward, having two single parents co-parenting together with their kids. And so what I have seen with private practice is it has really opened up a lot of those opportunities for me to kind of figure out what's going to work best for each client, and how do we work through those things together. And so that's how I've gotten to where I'm at today. And if you've made it all the way through to here, I definitely appreciate you hanging out with me. And just so you're, I know I've shared this, but just to make sure if you are looking for any in-person therapy services, I am in the Woodlands, and then in the Woodlands, Texas, and then I can also work with clients virtually from anywhere in Texas. And so I hope to be a resource. If you have anything that you're wanting to hear information about, anything you'd like for me to share about, please leave a comment. Let me know what it is that you guys are interested in hearing, because I'd like to be as useful as possible to you. If it's something that I don't know about, then I'll see about having someone come on and talk with me that can help give you some useful information. But thank you guys for joining, and I will see you soon.